And we're live. Good morning, everybody. How are we all doing today? So this is another episode of the HR Buzz Live. I hope you're excited for this one. You'll recognize one of our guests, and we've got a brand new face on the show today as well. Nonetheless, two fantastic individuals. I can't wait to get them introduced. Now, firstly, I want to implore you to get involved on this live stream. Comment, let us know your thoughts, feelings. What have we missed? What should we be talking about that we're not? You can drop your comments in down below. I have my trusty colleague Verity to my left, who is going to be moderating all of those. We're going to make you famous. We're going to pop them on the screen. We're going to discuss the things that you want discussed. So make sure you get involved and pop a comment in down below. So hello, everyone. Welcome back to HR Buzz Live. If you are joining us today, you're in the right place, because April has brought a lot of change for HR. We've got new legislation, shifting expectations, and let's be honest, a fair bit of noise as well. So today we're going to cut through all of that. This session is all about what HR needs to know right now and what to actually do about it, because that's quite important. And always, as always, this is a live session. So as I said, drop your questions, thoughts, even frustrations into the comments as we go, and we will make sure we pick up as many as we can. So without further ado, I would love to introduce my two fantastic guests. First up, we have Florence Hunter, a chartered fellow of the CIPD and executive HR director. Florence has a proven track record of transforming and scaling people functions across EMEA and APAC. Her experience spans industries including life sciences, creative, aviation, and retail, partnering with global brands such as Disney, Nintendo, and even British Airways. Known for her strategic clarity and people-centered approach, she specializes in culture, organizational design, and high-impact transformation. Florence, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleased to be here.
Thanks for joining us. And our second guest, Trish Hewitt, a known face here on HR Buzz Live and a personal friend of ours, Chief People Officer and founder of the amazing Haylo HR, known for her practical, straight-talking approach to leadership, talent, and organizational change. Trish brings over 20 years of experience transforming people strategies into practical, high-impact action. She specializes in leadership, talent, organizational change, and you may recognize her from TikTok and her podcast, where she shares accessible, real-world HR advice. It is so fantastic to have you both here. Welcome, Trish.
Thank you. It's so weird listening to an intro when people are talking about you in that way, but thank you. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what's changed and what actually matters. So we're going to start with some big picture thinking, I guess. And there's been a lot of updates this month from things like day one sick pay and beyond. So I'm interested in your perspective. What actually matters here, and what should HR teams really be paying attention to right now? And perhaps we'll go to you first, Trish.
I feel like the things that have happened in April, a lot of them are pretty standard, really. We've got changes in the national minimum wage, things around paternity and parental leave, all things that are just things that HR professionals need to keep an eye on their policies for, I would say, to be honest. I wouldn't say, I'm not sure whether or not Florence would agree, I wouldn't say the things that we've had in April are massively scary. Obviously, we've got the Fair Work Agency, and that's different. The things that are coming in October and the things that are coming in January, I would say, are probably a little bit more worrisome isn't the right term, but things that people really need to be on it with, because they are going to bring some quite real changes, in my view.
Okay, interesting. So let's segue into a little bit of that then. You've teased the audience there. What is coming up that they should be focusing on later in the year?
We're getting some changes around fire and rehire, which, I mean, it's not something that I would ever advise my clients do, but there are people out there who use that. And I think people need to be kind of aware of those changes that are coming. And next year, obviously, the biggie in terms of unfair dismissal and the changes that we've got there. So I think those are probably the bigger things that people need to be aware of. Not that you don't need to be aware of all the other stuff. There's loads of stuff that's happened in April, but those are probably the things that are going to shift the way that we do things. I mean, changing the national minimum wage doesn't massively impact the way we do things, although obviously it impacts SMEs and kind of cost and all that good stuff. But when we start moving things around like unfair dismissal rights, etc., that has an impact on the way that we operate as a function, in my view.
Yeah, interesting. So keep an eye on the ball right now, but have an eye on the future as well and what's coming. What about you, Florence? What would you add to that? What do you think HR pros should be focusing on right now?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Trish completely. I think because everything that we're describing is part of the Employment Rights Act, and it's so closely associated with the Labour government. It's been a long time coming, so we've kind of had this stuff breadcrumb towards us, and it does almost feel like we're starting with the smaller items first, like with the SSP entitlement, which, the concept remains the same. It's just the wait period that changes, that it's now a day one entitlement. And similarly, things like paternity leave becoming a day one entitlement, and unpaid parental leave. So those are, exactly as Trish said, those are primarily things that you'll want to address with your payroll systems and your policies. So largely administrative. I mean, there might be a little bit of work to do around sort of bringing the business with you in terms of understanding where these do have impact, depending on what your challenges are. So, for example, if you are an SME, then it might be worth doing a quick cost analysis to see what it would have cost you to have had SSP paid from day one for like the past 2 years, so you can get a ballpark figure of what the costs are that you can anticipate. It might be taking a cynical lens here, because as HR, you're often trying to see round corners and predict for the worst case scenario. It might be that you have managers that are worried about seeing an uplift in absence. You might have people that think, oh, well, if SSP is a day one entitlement now, does that mean everyone's going to suddenly be taking more sick leave? So it might be worth just being ready for those conversations, to walk managers through the fact that SSP is very low. It's not a significant incentive for anybody to start taking more sick leave. And you might want to remind them of what your absence monitoring procedures are, just by way of reassurance, to say, we look at this, we have an HR team that looks at this every month, this is how we manage it. We use, for example, the Bradford factor or whatever it might be. We can identify patterns quickly, and we encourage you to work closely with us if you feel like there are issues around absence management. So just because it's a statutory requirement that people receive pay earlier, it doesn't change anything about how we do our work and how we manage performance or absence issues or anything else. So that might be something that's coming up. But conversely, thinking of it from a completely different angle, if you have a workforce where you know that you have identified that you have a presenteeism issue, where people perhaps don't take sick leave enough, and they come in and they spread things around and things go around like wildfire, and people have given feedback saying that they avoid taking sick leave because they're worried about not receiving any pay at all, there's a completely different type of work to be done there. So I think with any of these changes, small and large, the name of the game is really adjusting to your business. Like what's the challenge and what's the relevance for your business? Because some of the things coming down the line, for example, around the change to how unions work and how they operate with businesses, those are really, really significant. If you're a unionized business, that's where all my attention would be right now. But if you're not, then you've got to calibrate and focus on the things that are actually going to be impactful. So it's a really interesting time to be working in HR, that's for sure.
I feel like the last 6 years has been a really interesting time to work in HR, isn't it, really? You mentioned a few things there, Florence, which I think it might be worth expanding on a little bit, just in terms of the theme of what might, not just HR teams, but the wider business be underestimating or perhaps misunderstanding. And you talk there about how it's important to tailor these changes and really get under the hood and understand how they affect your business. But also there's a piece there around making sure you're bringing your management teams, your people along on that journey with you. And I'm curious from both of you, and perhaps Florence, if you could go first, is there any other things that come to mind that either HR people or the wider business might be either misunderstanding or underestimating?
Do you want me to answer that whilst we wait for Florence to come back?
Yeah, go for it, Trish.
So I'm not sure there's a lot that people are necessarily misunderstanding. Oh, you're back, Florence. Do you want to go for it? You go.
I didn't hear the question. Very sorry. I dropped out there.
You go, Trish, and then I'll pass it over to Florence.
I think there's things that people need to be thinking about for the stuff that's coming in later, if I'm really honest. I think when we're thinking about things like the changes to unfair dismissal rights, a lot of the managers or the businesses that I work with rely on the fact that they've got a couple of years where they've got quite a bit of flex. Well, actually, that's going to go away and quite quickly. So I would have said managers and HR departments need to be thinking about that now and making sure that we've got the right processes in place to deal with kind of clear probationary periods and deal with problems when they arise. because obviously I work as a HR consultant, for HR consultancy. Most of the time people are coming to me and saying, Trish, I've had this problem. I say, okay, how long have you had it for? Maybe a year or so, year and a half. That's just not really going to be something that will be viable kind of going forward. So I don't think it's something that people are misunderstanding. I think people just need to be starting to prepare for it now, rather than waiting for January and then going, oh, there's something I need to do here. Think about changing your culture, the way you think about things and the way that you deal with problems, rather than kind of shoving them under the carpet.
Overarching message there seems to be, don't take your eye off the ball, guys. So Florence, we were just talking about there, you mentioned, making sure you bring the business with you and look at the modeling around the wider business piece and how these changes affect each individual business individually. What would you say are the other things that either HR teams or companies themselves, the wider team, might be misunderstanding or underestimating when it comes to, I suppose, not just these changes in April, but those that Trish has mentioned that are coming up as well?
It's a difficult question to answer at high level, like what teams or companies are misunderstanding, because I'm sure if I were in a consultant position and I was flying into different departments, I'd probably have lots of opinions about, what I think my approach would be. I can't say that thematically there's a huge kind of trend that I think, God, everyone's getting this wrong. But then I'm also very cognizant of the fact that, we all exist in our own echo chamber, and my LinkedIn is full of like lawyers and other HR people that I've worked with. So it seems to me that everybody has their finger on the pulse. Everyone's talking constantly about these changes, but also, outside of legislation, AI is a topic that we revisit again and again. And there's lots of narrative about that. And I haven't sort of identified that there's anything that I think everyone is getting terribly wrong. I think it's widely recognised that, the Employment Rights Bill is legislation. We have to adhere to it. You have to make sure that you're ready for it. And as Trish was saying, you don't want to be reactive. You don't want to be waiting until the last minute. You need to be planning now so that you can be ready for these changes. And so they're going to have as minimal disruption as possible. But yeah, I think what I see again in my echo chamber is just huge amounts of curiosity, and HR practitioners, employment lawyers, business leaders are interested and invested in the changes that are happening so rapidly at the moment, whether it's like challenges with the economy or whether it's technology or whatever it is. Everyone's opining on what they think the future of work will look like. And to me, that feels like a very healthy place to be. Nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows what the answers are going to be outside of the legislative changes that are fixed. We just don't know what work is going to look like in 10 years. And I think people expressing curiosity about it and trying to kind of test out new ideas and discuss them openly is a really healthy thing. So there's probably a bit of an indirect answer to your question, in that I haven't seen anything massive that I think people are misunderstanding at scale. I think we're just all trying to orient ourselves in uncertain times at the moment. And I think that's probably a healthy way to move forward, is by discussing these things openly and trying to problem solve together, and allowing for nuance as well, allowing for nuance that what works for one business or one industry isn't going to work across the board. Again, I'm thinking of technology here, but it can be that same principle can be applied to even the legislation that we're talking about, that it will affect businesses differently, and how you roll them out, how you affect these changes needs to be tailored.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And we live in an interesting time, as you've alluded to there, because never before has that 10-year time horizon out from today been so uncertain. I think, if you go back even 10, 15 years, you could predict with a fairly high degree of accuracy what the world of work is going to be like in 10 years time, whereas right now, and technology really is a major driver of this at the moment, with robotics, AI, quantum, and all these other things that are going on, and it's moving forward at such pace that it's very hard to know even what the world of work will look like in 12 months, never mind 10 years. And we talked a little bit about, kind of bringing this into the real world and what do these changes mean in practice. And in the short term, there's operational things that need to be done, policies updated, managers brought in line, comms to go out, and all of that kind of thing. But I suppose just to go a little bit deeper on the practical element of it, if someone's watching this and thinking, well, we haven't touched this yet, what should be their first step towards getting their ducks in order for next week? Who wants to take that first?
I think my approach to almost everything is, what's the problem that we're trying to solve right now? What's the challenge that we have in the business? And if it is a compliance gap, like for example, if you don't have a designated person or a process for keeping up to date with legislative changes, then that's what I'd be prioritizing. That compliance, especially given the Employment Rights Bill, but also the volatility of the times we're in. I think it's really important that you have dedicated resource that are paying attention to things that are moving and changing, and making sure that you've got coverage in place, whether it's policies or again, thinking of technology, whether you've got IT structures in place to make sure that you're minimizing risk. So that governance piece, I think is really important for right now. But it depends. If you're a mature business that already has compliance well covered off, then you can look at the more interesting sort of strategic work around, what does the future of your business look like? Not the future of work, because I think as interesting as it is as a dinner party conversation, and as passionate as I am about talking about it, I think in a professional context, you can almost become overwhelmed by it. It's such a big question, and really, the best thing that you can do is focus on the thing that's in front of you. So like I say, what's the gap that we need to close here? What's our operational challenge that's getting in the way of all our different departments? And how can we as an HR department help to solve that problem? And I think through doing that, you move forward one step at a time. I think if you start to get a bit knee-jerky, and if you panic and you think, well, we need to be keeping up, and we need to be, inserting AI into processes, and we need to be thinking about, if you think on a macro scale too much, then you kind of lose your grip. I think you have to focus on doing the small stuff well, and the big stuff will come over time. And I think unless you're, a commercial giant, if you're in Silicon Valley, then you'll have consultants, you'll have external teams that will be advising you on how you should be, interpreting these changes. I think for the vast majority of businesses, you don't need to be reactive. I think it's important to be thoughtful and avoid recklessness. And I know I'm speaking in sort of abstracts here, but again, these are such big concepts, and what is a priority for each business will be totally specific. And that's sort of the art and the science of HR, is understanding what those priorities are.
Absolutely. So the message from you then, it seems, is make sure your compliance is in order. There are changes afoot, but there are also going to be guaranteed lots more changes coming, because the world is shifting rapidly in every fashion. So make sure that you've got one eye on the ball when it comes to that kind of stuff, not just now, but what's coming in the future. And Trish, what would you say would be any quick wins or low effort, high impact actions that HR pros could take right now?
I kind of would echo what Florence was saying earlier. I guess my view is, I feel like within the profession, I think we've got this. Like, I think there's quite a lot out there in terms of what the changes are. There's lots of lawyers doing stuff. So quick wins, what would I say? Check your policies, make sure that you're paying people correctly. That's probably the key thing. But equally, there's loads of really good resources out there, right? There's loads of people doing YouTube videos, lawyers doing YouTube videos. We've got things like the FSB that people can rely on. And I think if you're not sure, just ask. I think where you've got bigger organisations where there are HR departments, largely, obviously I can't speak for the whole HR profession, but largely people are on this. The CIPD are pumping out a lot of information on this to make sure that we know what we're doing. I think where there's a bit more of a gap, to be honest, or at least what I'm seeing, is SMEs, the smaller companies that have got maybe a couple of employees and not necessarily on top of this stuff. Because, when you run your own business, you're not an accountant, you're not a HR person, you're, a specialist at what you do. So I think, again, for SMEs, I'd probably say, if you're unsure, have a look. There's lots of resources out there. You don't necessarily need to be paying for information. But if you are unsure, have a look, or get some support, really, rather than kind of burying your head in the sand.
If only there was a dedicated TikTok channel that people could subscribe to go and view content like this. It seems like a nice segue. What is your handle on TikTok, just so people can go and follow you if they want to?
Oh, do you know what? I think I've changed it recently. I think it's Trish in HR. Hang on, let me have a look. Bear with. I should know that, shouldn't I? Yes, it's Trish in HR, kind of all one word.
Perfect. So, guys, go and get your follows on. Go and follow Trish. So, let's look now at where organisations might be getting it wrong. So, are we seeing, I mean, we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but are we seeing more reactive HR than proactive at the moment? What do you think about that, Trish?
Yeah, I would say I'm seeing a lot of kind of reactive HR, but I wouldn't necessarily say that's different. Do you know what I mean? I think there's just in general, in the work that I do, I tend to see that people leave stuff too late. I'm definitely seeing, unfortunately, a lot more redundancies at the moment. A lot more organisations kind of just getting to a financial crunch point and not being able to keep people, which is frustrating because obviously people have got lives and all that kind of good stuff. But yeah, I'm not sure I've seen like a massive shift or a change. I think people are just kind of reacting at the moment, whereas actually I think they probably need to stop, wait, plan before just reacting to stuff. Sorry, it's a bit of a fluffy answer. Apologies.
No, it makes perfect sense. I suppose it invites me to ask a question of our audience today, and that is, how prepared do you feel for April's changes and the changes coming up later on in the year and next year? You know, and be honest. And if you feel that you can, pop us a comment in the comment section below, and we'll pop them on screen if we can. Florence, I'm interested in your perspective on this. Do you feel like there's anything that's being overcomplicated unnecessarily at the moment when it comes to these changes in particular, or just HR in general?
This is a fun question for me.
Are you still there, Florence?
I can still see Florence, but she's frozen.
Oh, there's some technical issues.
Hello, sorry about that. Am I back?
She's back.
We're back. Sorry about that. I just caught the tail end of that where you were asking if there's anything that we overcomplicate.
Yeah.
I would say, actually, I think what we do is by nature quite complicated, and I sort of think it should be. I think employment law and managing people is it requires arms and legs. To see round corners, you need to be organised. There are lots of moving parts. You know, people are entitled to different things based on so many different factors. Actually, I think what we do is complicated, and I think my sort of principle with things is that I do tend to engineer processes and policies and things to death. But the key is that it needs to feel feather light to everybody else. It needs to feel to other people, to your stakeholders, that that they're getting a good experience, that things are quick and easy to find, that you're responsive, that there are minimal touch points, minimal friction. But I think in terms of thinking about, you know, when you're, for example, writing a policy or, you know, setting up software, I think it is good to actually embrace how complicated things are and to think of as many different eventualities as possible, and to try and, you know, you can't always think of everything. There will always be scenarios that you didn't expect, or there'll be changes that you weren't expecting. But I sort of lean towards leaning into the complicatedness of what we do. But I don't think that burden should ever be on the workforce. I don't think people should ever see how complicated things are behind the scenes. That's the skill, is making sure that you've got an HR department that has thought of everything before they have. If that makes sense.
I love that. No,
I don't know if
that.
You managed to catch any of that. My connection doesn't seem to be great.
Yeah, no, we caught all of that. That's a really good answer. And it's true of most things in life and in business, isn't it? You know, that life is incredibly complicated. Business, tons of complexities. But actually, when it comes to the practical application, you've got to make that as simple as possible in order for people to, you know, buy into that and come along on that journey with you, right? So final question, I think, really then is, what's the biggest gap between policy and reality? And perhaps, Trish, you can take this one first.
Oh, what, just in general, or in relation to like the Employment Rights Act? Or
I think let's go in general. If there's something specifically relating to the Employment Rights Act, then of course share that as well. But just generally.
I suppose I'd probably link it to what Florence was saying there. I totally agree that what we do is inherently complicated, right? A big part of what we do is translate quite difficult law into stuff that people can understand. Obviously, not being lawyers, but doing in HR. If you look at the Employment Rights Act in itself, it's hundreds and hundreds of pages, right? But we try and simplify that down and make sure that people kind of understand everything. I'm not sure how best to answer that question, to be honest, because I feel like I'll probably just be waffling a little bit. But I suppose for me, it's kind of a question of how, as HR practitioners, we do what Florence was alluding to. We make sure that things are feather light, easy to understand, all that kind of stuff. I guess what I see in my work in a lot of the cases is people don't have policies. And I think Florence and I are probably a little bit different in terms of approach to policies. In that I think it's important to have them. I think it's important that they are kind of easy to use, etc., etc. But a lot of the time, people just don't have them, so that gap is massive, right? But people also just don't know what they don't know. They don't know that they need to have a policy that covers kind of X, Y, and Z. They don't know that things change quite massively for us in April and October when it comes to employment law, because they're not specialists in it. That's probably where I would see there being a gap. But other than that, I'd probably be waffling, if I'm honest.
I love your
I can
honesty.
do that if you'd like.
No, that's great. And Florence, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, it sounds like your kind of gap that you highlighted there, the big one, is that the gap between how, and Trish, you kind of touched on this as well, how complex it really is in the background, but then how simple it needs to be in terms of how you flow that out through the workforce.
Yeah, and policies sit in the interesting middle because they're both a tool for the HR department and for the company to protect itself, but they are also a tool for employees to understand how the business operates and how things work and how they can, what they are supposed to do if they're pregnant or they're sick or, whatever it might be. So they sit at that intersection. So I think one of the traps sometimes with policy writing is to get too detailed. And if you start getting into almost process territory where you're saying, click this button, go into this system, this person is responsible for that, it becomes, firstly, very boring to read, and secondly, very inflexible, and you're going to have to update it every 5 minutes. And as Trish said, we already have to update them pretty frequently in line with changes to the law. So I tend to find, again, a light touch is better with policy writing. You can almost use them as an opportunity to establish a company voice. If you think of it almost like you're in marketing, the company brand, how do you want people to experience the company from the inside? You can use them to establish tone and voice and the philosophy. So you can just say, the company complies with the legislative requirements as per the Gov website, link, and then you can use the policy itself to talk about, we're committed to ensuring that employees in this company have a great experience whenever, blah, blah, blah. Do you know what I mean? And you can use them more as a messaging tool. So I think policies can be, can have a lot of weight. And I've heard some interesting ideas around this, that lots of companies are moving to like chatbots or search bars, and I completely see the value in that. And again, it's important to tailor to your demographics. If that's what your employees want, then it's a great thing to explore. But I do think there's still value in the traditional sort of, even if they're digital, but a guidance document, because the benefit of having policies captured that way is that when people go to look at them, they find information they wouldn't have otherwise thought to look for. If you're using a chatbot, you're only ever going to find the answer to the question you're looking for, which is, can I cancel my annual leave? Whereas if you're reading through a policy, you might happen to see guidance saying, for example, it's an expectation of the company that, I don't know, in emergency scenarios, members of leadership are still contactable, like, I don't know, whatever it might be. If that's your company position, that's probably a good place for it to live so that it's communicated transparently. So yeah, I'm a real sort of champion of making sure that you've got policies that reflect reality, but also being careful not to get bogged down in things that are going to trip you up later. They don't need to be chapter and verse, I find.
Absolutely. And it makes me think of a video that we've just recorded that's coming out on LinkedIn shortly, talking about the kind of communication profile of a business and likening that to how we communicate as human beings. I don't know if you've heard this before, but words are just 7% of comms. 38% of comms is tonality, but 55% is body language. And we were thinking about how does this apply to communication in a business? And we likened the policies to the words themselves. So they're very important. They create that foundation, that baseline. But actually, it's more about how the people in the business interpret those policies and then how they act. And I think the interpretation, how people think of what they mean, because we're all different, right? And when we read something, when we hear something, we're all going to interpret that in a slightly different way. And how it's interpreted informs our action. So the interpretation for me would be the tonality, and then the way that people act, from leadership right down to the people on the front line. That's your body language. And that really is the most important part of that communication. But it all feeds off this foundation of the policies, the procedures, the processes, the things that sit behind and kind of provide those guardrails for what you do. So that leads me on to a question for the audience then is, how are your policies looking? You know, when was the last, do you have them to start with? When was the last time you updated them? Drop us a comment if you feel brave enough to. Trish, did you have something?
No, I suppose I just wanted to say I totally agreed with what Florence said. Like, I'm definitely on the same page as you in terms of policy, so that's lovely. It's really lovely to hear. And I'd never really thought of it in terms of like an employer brand tool, which I think is a really interesting and useful way to think of it. So no, I think that was really cool. So I liked what Florence said, really.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so we have looked a little bit ahead, but let's just perhaps recap that to bring this session right round full circle. So Trish, you mentioned a few things that, you know, not just coming up in April, we need to have a focus on those now, but also need to keep that eye on the ball of what's coming in the next 6 to 12 months as well. So can you just recap for us what you think teams should be preparing for now that's coming down the line?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of quite interesting touch points. So we've got October and January 2027. So I mentioned fire and rehire, obviously not something that I would think anybody likes doing, but there are changes and reforms coming to that. It's not being completely outlawed, but the idea is it'll only be able to be used in specific circumstances. So if companies are in kind of dire financial straits and that's something that they need to do. The government have been really kind of pushing to try and get rid of it. Doesn't feel like they're getting rid, but they are kind of cracking down in terms of the way that it can be used. The tribunal time limits piece might be quite a big thing for some people. So at the moment, people have got kind of 3 months to be able to bring a tribunal claim from the date that the thing happened. But actually from October, that's going to be increased and it will be 6. So I'm not sure how that's going to impact businesses, but actually, you know, if you've got disgruntled employees and they've got more time to think about it, we might see an increase in the number of claims that we get. And I guess my worry with that, not that you asked me what my worry is, but just so you know, my worry with that is the tribunal system is already so overrun. So if we start seeing more things coming through it, then that's just not going to be great for a lot of people. There's changes to 0 hours contracts. So when the government started talking about this, they were talking about exploitative 0 hours contracts, but helpfully didn't tell us what the word exploitative meant in any way, shape or form. And I think that's quite an interesting one, because I speak to a lot of people who quite like 0 hours contracts. They like the flexibility that they get from them. But in October, there's going to be changes around things like guaranteed hours, making sure people get more notice of 0 hours contracts or 0 hours shifts. So I suppose it's kind of just cracking down on the people that use them poorly, right? Because the people that like them, I assume, are going through kind of positive processes with them. Equally, we've then got menopause and equality action plans. So that'll be quite a big shift for us. So I'm quite interested to see how that works. And then I think there's some third-party harassment bits as well, in terms of businesses being liable for kind of customers, clients kind of harassing staff. And obviously harassment in any form is not great, but that's something that employers will need to navigate, because there's then going to be kind of further liability. And then 2027, obviously we've already touched on it, but the big thing is that change in unfair dismissal rights. So we started off with the government saying it would be a day 1 right, and I think we all went, oh, at that point. They've significantly rode back from that. But, you know, that change is coming. So we're going from the 2 years to 6 months, which to me, it does feel reasonable. I think that's probably a reasonable shift. But, you know, as I was saying earlier, it's that piece of making sure that we're dealing with problems now. We've got processes now to deal with people where there's performance issues or kind of probation isn't quite right, rather than waiting until January and having a bit of panic. Sorry, I feel like I waffled a bit, but hopefully that covers everything.
What I took away from that was there is literally a torrent of stuff coming downstream over the next 12 to 18 months. So
yeah,
lots
I think
to be
it's bigger
thinking about.
stuff too, personally. Yeah. I don't know if Florence would agree, but I think the stuff that's further out, that's going to have more of a shift in terms of the way that our profession works, personally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Any comments on that, Florence?
Yeah, no, it is. It's a lot. There's a lot happening, and the employment rights bill is seismic. Really, it's the most significant change to the, the workplace in a generation. And I think again, it all comes back to things we've already talked about. In that, as an HR job to sift through it and translate it in a way that feels as light as possible, and you want to make sure that your stakeholders. Oh my goodness, have I dropped out again?
No, you're here. We got you.
We can still hear you. Oh, she jinxed it.
We're back.
Said it stopped.
I was like, to know when I'm talking and decides to shut me down. Am I back? Sorry. Yes, it's a lot coming down the line. It's our job to make it feel feather light and to loop in our stakeholders so that they can have the right level of visibility without panicking, not getting dragged under with all the admin that comes with it. And it's one because it is arduous, for want of a better word, to sift through these changes and to make sure they're implemented properly. It's a lot of work, but I do always think, even if there are aspects of these changes that are going to be more expensive or, temporarily disruptive or whatever it might be, fundamentally, I think we're fortunate to be in a country where we have these regulations and restrictions. Whether you're an employee or whether you're a business leader, it might feel like it's, an overwhelm of structure and rules and regulations and everything's becoming more expensive and more difficult. In another couple of years, once we're on the other side of this, it will have adapted, and it'll be one of those things we look back. And also, the law changes, new governments come in and they cycle things back. Things change all the time. So I think just staying nimble, staying agile, embracing the change and thinking of it as a positive thing. It's all progress, even if things shift over time. We're watching evolution happen in real time. And I think, our value as HR professionals is making it as smooth as possible for the people that we work with. But it'll certainly be keeping us busy for a while.
Absolutely. Well, Trish, Florence, it's been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much to you both for your time this morning. Lots of great, powerful thoughts for the audience to take away there, and lots of things coming up as well. So if there's one takeaway from today, it's don't get lost in the noise, right? Focus on what is actually going to be impacting your people in your organization. Work to model these changes now and in the future, and see how you need to tailor them to your specific people, your workforce, and the way that you do things. And I suppose the final one is just take action now. Even if it's small, get started, be more proactive and less reactive. HR moves quickly, and, the teams that stay close to what really matters are the ones that ultimately are going to stay ahead. So just before we wrap up, we have the next session to give a little plug to, because next month we have the brilliant session lined up with Claire Foster, who is the HR director at RAC. So really excited to get her on to talk about how she successfully transformed the company's Glassdoor score and what HR teams can learn from that in practice. So make sure you keep an eye out for that one. It's going to be a fantastic session. Once again, thank you so much, Trish and Florence. You are phenomenal, both of you. And again, really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us today. Thank you also to our wonderful audience, those of you that have watched both live and on the replay. And even if you're watching this on the replay, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and be part of the conversation. Thanks once again. We'll see you at the next HR Buzz Live.